Tick, 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 tick on the watch, and life's too short for me to stop. Oh, baby, your time is running out. I won't let you turn around and tell me.
So continuing on with the timing belt, once you get the cover removed, you've got your tensioner. There's a 14 millimeter. You got to loosen that up. So once you loosen that, only takes maybe one full turn, less than that. Loosen that up, pull the tension off of the belts by raising the tensioner up, and then tighten the bolt. I just have it tight, pulled up and tightened by hand. So the tension is off these belts. Still got, you know, some tension here, but the balance shaft belt is pretty loose. You can start removing it from the pump side, the oil pump. I went ahead and while I had the tension here on the balance shaft on the exhaust side, I went ahead and cracked that loose. I use a Phillips, slide that in. There's a hole. You can see that there is an indentation here. This is an indication that you need to line up here on the block. There's two lines. There's one on the balance shaft and one on the block. So I use this. I mean, that tells you you're at right where you need to be for top dead center. Put this, there's a hole on the side. Put this in there, use a 14 millimeter, snap it loose. You can do the same with your cam gears. You can use a 14 mil, excuse me, those aren't 14. That was a 12 on the balance shaft. These are 14s up here. You can use an extension piece to sit across onto the head, being careful with that, and you can snap those loose, get the tension off of the bolts so that you can remove those quite easily. If you're removing sills, that is, I'm gonna remove these cams and replace these sills. I don't see really any bad leaks or anything, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I think I've got a little bit of leakage coming off of the crankshaft sill. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I've got the tension off the belts. I'm gonna go ahead and loosen all these bolts, and then we're gonna remove each belt. And then don't be too worried. Everything's keyed. You're not going to lose timing, because when you put this back together, you're going to have marks, you're going to have indications of where to set it. You have, for this balance shaft here, you're going to be able to use the lines and a Phillips to slide in and line that up. And then you also have a maintenance type hole that there's a bolt under the block, and I'll try to get an image of that. And you'll also be able to put, I believe they call it for a bolt or something to that effect, but you can use a Phillips to line that up, because that one's really important. Line that up, and then you'll be able to line every aspect of the timing belt. We'll go over that a little bit later, so I'm going to get all this stuff loosened up. So I have the two belts removed. The balance shaft belt was pretty simple. When you get to the oil pump side, it doesn't have like a walk blocker, as it were, on the edge down there. I know you can't really see it, but it's the furthest one to the right with the gears on it. It kind of sticks out a little bit. So that one, once you get the tension off it, you can kind of just start sliding it off. Came off pretty quickly, no big deal there. I went ahead, like I said, I removed the balance shaft gear, got that out of the way, went ahead and removed the belt gear on the lower for the crank that drives all that. Pretty clean, got that out of there. Came off the keyway, really simple. I used the method of putting an extension through the cam gear and holding on it upward, and then just cracking that loose on these. Now it does move a touch, but I'm just trying to be very careful. So here we are. We've got the 2 belts off. Now these belts are like perfect. I don't know when they were changed. Not in my lifetime of owning this vehicle, but they don't show any wear on the corners. They don't show any wear that I can see that's terrible. I don't know. I mean, you can see this belt looks pretty clean. There's no cracks. It's not oiled up. It looks great. And that is the same with the balance shaft belt. Now this could be original. I really don't think it is, but there is OEM part number, and that right there, if you can read it, P13 tag 014, so that's 14400 tack P13 tack 014, and this is the Honda belt. It looks great. I don't feel bad replacing it now because it looks so good, but oil. So you've got multiple seals, you've got cam seals, you've got balance shaft seals, you've got a crank seal. All those seals need to be eventually replaced, and that's what the main goal is here, is oil consumption, oil prevention for leakage. H22s, they burn oil, they like to leak oil. I guess that's just it. If it's a fine-tuned machine, shouldn't have those issues if you keep up on the maintenance. So I have removed the tensioner for the side of the balance shaft, and now I'm going to be removing the what looks like the original, if you can zoom in there, looks like the original auto tensioner. And supposedly these things do go out over time. Guaranteed best solution out there is your Kaizen speed KS tuned manual tensioner. And to be honest with you, they're not cheap, but a great thing about them is that you can get a deal on them for like 100 and like say $30. You can get a timing belt and the tensioner, the auto tensioner. You can change that out for a manual, and it's super simple, install in like 5 minutes. Now granted, you got to get to this point where you're removed everything here, but I recommend, if you can afford it, getting the Kaizen speed. I know that like 1320 and a bunch of aftermarket people have produced these kinds of manual tensioners. Personally, if you can afford it, get the KS tuned. That guy deserves it, deserves that kind of business for the fact that, you know, the effort, the engineering, the talent that he put forth in the H22s, he deserves every bit of it. Believe me, if I could afford it right now, we'd be doing a balance shaft delete with the KS tuned delete kit with the oil pump. We'd be doing the auto tension or the manual tensioner replacement. We'd be going oil pan from KS Tune. I mean, they have H22 stuff that is just awesome. So anyway, enough about that. We're gonna go ahead and start removing the auto tensioner down below. We'll get a view of a few other components. We'll check out that water pump. We'll clean up all this oil, and we're going to start replacing seals. Once we get the seals done, put everything back together, get everything lined up, and we're going to go ahead and install these belts. So the main goal here is the oil leaks, and hopefully we'll get those resolved. Alrighty, so a majority of everything's been removed. I've gotten the cam gears off, and a majority of like the tensioner, the engine mount bracket that attaches to the block. Now's a really good time, once you've removed, start removing some gears, cams, take a look at particular items like, oh look, my cam seal's leaking. Well, I'm going to replace that anyway, but hey, yeah, I need to replace that. Good time to start wiping things down, get some of that crud that may have found its way inside those covers, or that's built up from just driving around, or you got a leak or whatever. Now's a good time to clean those up before you start removing. Say like, I'm going to remove the water pump. Well, if you got a bunch of crud everywhere, you don't want that cross-contamination of oil particulates or whatever hitting your coolant. If you are replacing your water pump, now's a good time to make sure, if you haven't already, drain a little bit of that coolant so that you don't make a gigantic mess. So I'm replacing the 2 cam sills, the sill for the crank, even though it looks perfect, and the balance shaft sill. After that, we'll have to line everything back up. One thing I am doing, and let's see if I can move this camera without making it too bad. One thing I am doing is I'm using the Kaizen Speed walk blocker, and I have not installed it yet. I'm going to get cleaned up, and I'm going to put this on my new tensioner here. Here's the old one. Got all these things lined up, and this kind of like how I removed it. Made sure all my bolts are good. I have a good memory of how things came across if you don't have the manual, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and get this installed. Yes, they do use JB Weld. Check out their website, Kaizen Speed or KS Tuned. Check out the YouTube videos. They make a lot of good products, and they show you how to put them together. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to get cleaned up, get this oil off my hands. We're going to mix up some JB Weld. I'm going to put this on here. I'm going to let that set for a long period of time, so that I'm not going to use it anytime soon, but I'm going to go ahead and get that dealt with, and we'll start getting everything cleaned up on the block, and we'll be back in business and ready to go for a timing belt within the next couple hours. We should have it all back together. I will not be using the Kaizen Speed walk blocker until I think it's cured long enough. It's like 90 degrees in the garage. By the time I get that far and I've done my detail cleaning, I think probably 4 hours will have passed. I'm going to go ahead and install it. I'm going to set everything up. I will allow it to cure overnight, or during the day shift, I should say, because I got Graves this week, and we're going to go from there. I'll come back, I'll tighten everything up, put everything back together, put the valve cover back on. Now's a really great time, if you've got your cam gears off, to clean around these corners that you might not otherwise be able to do with cams on there. It's kind of a hard place to reach. There's always a little bit of crud sitting right here in these corners where you put your Honda Bond or your gray sealant, your RTV, whatever you want to call it. So now's a really good time to clean up all this area, do some inspections, think about where you're at, and be prepared to realign. Another good thing, while you're cleaning, put your dipstick back in. I put the dipstick back in because I don't want things falling off. I mean, I got a little bit of crud up here, and it's really just kind of a little bit of road grime and some sand or something, and it just wipes away. But I don't want that falling down into that hole that the manufacturer says, take this out. So cross-contamination control, keep the things out of there. Put your valve cover back on. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do some prevention for cross-contamination right now. I don't want nothing flying in here and getting all jacked up. But now's a great time to clean and then move on to your next steps. Alright, so I have installed Kaizen Speed walk blocker. Really simple. There's a YouTube video. He explains all about it, how to do it with the JB Weld, how to prep it, how to install it. Check it out, kstune.com. Some of the pointers he gives out is making sure it's really clean on both the bearing for the tensioner and the walk blocker, making sure the surface areas are nice and clean. So you just mix up some JB Weld. That stuff holds like so much pressure, it's not going to go anywhere. Cure time, it's 24 hours. You can expect it to pretty much be ready to go in 24 hours. So I'm going to leave it. It's installed. I am running a tensioner. I'm not using the auto tensioner. I'm using a manual tensioner. So I'm going to let this sit out I'm not going to use the car or anything. I'm not going to do anything with this. I'm not going to use it for 24 hours like he suggests. So it's all installed. I'm going to move on. I'm going to finish cleaning up the car. It's going to take a little bit of time, and then we'll start prepping everything for seals, getting the seals replaced. I just wanted to point out this thing's pretty cool. I'm going to tighten up my timing belt a little bit more than just stock. I want to be able to have that nice and tight, and I like the idea of the walk blocker. It's a really inexpensive addition. Like I said, go to kstune.com. Reed, he has done a number of things for the H22 community. Check out his products. I advise you buy KS Tuned if you can. Okay, so as you can tell, the old seals have been replaced. These are here you have the balance shaft seal, crank, and the 2 cams. That's the kit I used. It's the Dayco. It's the Dayco SK0027, and I had to write that on there. Here's the slip that it came with. You can see that part number, SK0027. So it comes with some pre-assembly lube to lubricate the seals when you install them. It's more like a grease. It feels real thick. I'm sure it helps in some degree, but I've got the 2 cams here. Got those sealed up. I've got the seal on the balance shaft, and then we've got a new seal on the crank. So we're all done with those. Been letting the Kaizen Speed walk blocker sit. It's sitting there. I'm keeping the pressure down on it. I don't think it's gonna budge. I cleaned it up real good. I think it looks great. Right now we're gonna do the water pump. I cleaned up the surface area, so if you ever want to know what your block's information is on the engine block for your pistons, they're right there. Alright, B, 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 B. What does that mean? Well, it just means like the piston tolerances. If you go out and buy the manufacturer's repair manual, you'll get some information in regards to what all that means. So the water pump, I can see the little eagle seal on there, the little stamp. So that may be an original or at least OEM replacement. Same with the oil pump. Now what it looks like to me is that everything is either original. Now the car's got 96,000 miles, so it's either original or somebody replaced it with OEM. And everything looks really great for being like that. So you tell me, what do you think? Probably a good thing to replace all this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and proceed on with that water pump, and we will touch bases in a little bit. Alrighty, water pump installed. There are 5 bolts. There are 2 on top, you can see. 1 just below that's peeking its head out. You've got the one on the far side next to the firewall area here on the unibody going that way towards the firewall, and then one underneath that. Pretty simple. Regardless if you empty out your radiator, when you release the seal on this, you're going to get some coolant coming out, so be prepared. Either have it ready with a bunch of rags or whatever you have available to clean up during the process and afterwards. I went through about 2 old towels and maybe 5 or 6 of my rags, etc., and then I'll have to clean up whatever I didn't collect in a pan later. So the torque specifications on the 10mm bolts, all the bolts are the same length, with the exception of that one that you see right there. That one's a part of the tensioner setup, so it attaches to the spring. All the torques are the same. They're all 10mm, and it is 8.7 foot-pounds, which is 104.4 inch-pounds. I went with the Gates. Gates I prefer. I would have loved to win OEM, but I could have spent an arm and a leg for that, and that's not in the budget. Gates has good products. So with the Gates water pump, it is 41046, and comes with the seal. And then this is the timing belt kit I'm using, TCK226. Alright, so we got seals in. I mean, we cleaned it. We got the seals in. Everything's going good. Water pump's in. I'll have to top off the fluids. I'm going to go ahead and clean everything up again and make sure that there's nothing residual, especially on this, for the balance shaft that's on the gearing for the oil pump. You'll have to line that up with the service or maintenance port on the back side of the block. I'm not really worried about it. I just want to make sure I don't have any coolant on there, cause any kind of slippage. So we'll go ahead and I'll get this all cleaned up. And it's been about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours since I did the Kaizen speed. I'm not real fast with anything. I'm just taking my time, having a good time, listening to the radio, doing video. And we're going to get this tied up tonight, hopefully. As soon as I'm good on what I wanted to clean and all the seals haven't popped out due to force being pushed in, I like to verify those. I like to make sure they don't pop out. I have had cam seal and crank seals, I've had them like pop out a little bit after I've done like a water pump, and I'm like, what the heck, you know. Honda came out with a driver specifically for the crankshaft. If you have that part, fantastic, good for you, lucky you. The one thing on this one, down on the balance shaft over here, typically there is a retainer for this seal, and on this there's no retainer, and I don't have one. I don't have an extra one, and the whole time the seal never popped out. So there's like this little C clamp, and then it attaches to one of the bolts here, like right here to this bolt, and then it looks like a C, and it's just a retainer to keep that seal flush. Since there is some give, there is a little bit of give on those balance shafts, so I don't know why. Maybe that's just something they did. I couldn't tell you, but anyway, we're gonna go and get started on a little bit of cleanup and then start putting that timing belt in. Alright, so I've got some work done. I wanted to go over some numbers. When you start putting everything back together, I started with the lower crank pulley. Make sure your key's in. You slide that pulley on. You put your keyway in. You make sure that you put your top dead center sensor back on, and those are 10 mils and they're 8.7 foot-pounds or 104.4 inch-pounds. So, well, same as the water pump. Water pump has those 5 bolts. They're 10 mil and they're 8.7 foot-pounds or 104.4 inch-pounds. So I started at the bottom, made sure everything was clean from any kind of coolant that came splashing off. Tighten that down. Went to the next. I came up and I put the back cover on, and the all these 10 mils that hold covers on. Made sure the cover was clean. That's 8.7 foot-pounds, and then put on the walk blocker, that bolt, that tensioner bearing bolt. You have to put sealant, liquid sealant, on the bolt side that goes into the block, and this calls for 49 foot-pounds. Now 49 foot-pounds is quite a bit, and unfortunately I can't get my torque wrench and an extension to reach that section right there of the bolt. So I just gave it a feel, as it were, to how tight it was when I had to take it off, and I just tried to get it back to that. It's pretty tight. I don't think that'll be coming off very easily. So far I have not found On the manufacturer's repair manual, the torques for the 10 mil adjustment bolt. Oh no, wait, that adjustment bolt, the adjustment bolt for here, down here is 33 when you put for the balance tensioner, balance belt tensioner. For that 10 mil up here, this maintenance one, sorry, I get my finger in there. This one right here, haven't found the torque on that, but it is a 10 mil and it's likely to not be too much. Same with this one here. Haven't found the torque specs on that. I would imagine it's probably around, once you tighten everything up, you get your belt installed and all that, it's probably around 33 foot-pounds. It's a 14 mil, but it's not a hefty bolt, so I'm going to say probably around 20 to 30 foot-pounds. You got your cams, so on your camshaft, gears here, I just got those in. They're just hand tight. Just starting to put everything back together. Those are 37 foot-pounds. Once I get the timing belt on, and we'll do the balance shaft on the exhaust side, we will be doing a number of 22 foot-pounds for that pulley or gear. If you messed with the gear over here, that's the balance shaft gear set. If you were to mess with that to torque that down, and in order to torque that down, you got to get it on the back of the block to the access panel. The bolt, you have to remove a bolt, and then you can put a I think the manual calls for a specific size bolt and length, but I've used a large Phillips, and that torque for that side of the balance shafts is 18 foot-pounds, and that's how you'll hold it in place. You'll hold it in place on the back side of the block from that access hole, which is with a bolt. We didn't remove that, so that's good to go, but in order to set the timing, we will be ensuring if we need to use that, we will. So let's see, anything else here? So when we put the mount attachment, there's 3 below, and then there'll be 1 up here, you can see right between the cams. There's 1 up there, and then there's 2 more that attach on that little bracket. So these right here is what I'm talking about. These right here, these 3 attach to this side. Up here there's 2 there, and 1 to the head of the cylinder head. So on that, once you get to that point, they're 16 foot-pounds. Still trying to find the mount down here. I'm trying to find those. And then if you're using an auto tensioner or an aftermarket manual tensioner, the manual tensioner is 16 foot-pounds. So I think we've covered everything. That maintenance bolt on the back side for the gear set on the right there, down below. On this one right here, that maintenance bolt, that access bolt that you can get to lock it into place with another like Phillips, that's 16 foot-pounds. So there's some numbers for you. I'm gonna keep going. It's getting early in the morning. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll be putting the timing belt on with the aftermarket tensioner, and then once the timing belt's on and I've got it locked into place, and yes, that walk blocker is installed, and like I said, I've been out probably inside outside just kind of hanging out. I got a graveyard shift to go to, so it's been sitting there for about 6 hours. I'm not going to run it. I don't have a problem putting some tension on it, but we're not going to try to put any force for it to come off. But anyway, we're going to be tying things up for the timing belt. I can't really do too much once I get past the balance shaft belt, because I don't have a crank bolt. I ordered a new one, waiting on that. So there's a few numbers for you. going to go ahead and end this part here, and then we'll continue on another one.